What if everything history remembered, every victory, every heartbreak, every turning point, hinged not on a famous general or a grand strategy, but on a young man no one ever noticed? What if a war, one of the largest the world had ever seen, shifted because a mechanic asked a question others never thought to ask? These were thoughts that didn't belong to Evan Ward. He was just a quiet 19-year-old from Nebraska, the son of a farmer who'd never raised his voice unless calling in the cows. Evan wasn't brave like his brother who joined the infantry. He wasn't brilliant like the engineers who designed aircraft. He wasn't charismatic like the pilots whose names girls wrote in letters. He was small. At least that's what he told himself. But sometimes life grabs you by the collar and drags you into a moment you never expected, one where your choice changes everything. And for Evan, that moment began on a windy February morning on an English airfield when he looked up at the gray sky and wondered, what if there's something I'm missing? 8th Air Force Airfield, England, 1944. Most days, Evan stood near Hangar 3 with a rag in one hand and a wrench in the other, wiping down tools while watching P-51 Mustangs streak into the sky. He admired them in a way only someone who felt earthbound could. The pilots swaggered across the runway in leather jackets, goggles around their necks, their confidence shining brighter than the polished silver on their planes. They laughed loudly. They slapped each other on the back before missions. They lived like tomorrow wasn't promised. Evan envied them, not for the fame, not for the danger, but because when they climbed into those cockpits, they looked like they belonged somewhere important. Evan often wondered if he'd ever belong anywhere, but one person on the base never treated him like background noise: Captain Malcolm Reeves. A decorated pilot with dark, thoughtful eyes and a smile that felt like warm coffee on a cold day, Malcolm always made time for him. During meal breaks, Malcolm would sit beside Evan instead of the officers. "You ever wonder why people look up when a plane flies by?" Malcolm asked one afternoon. Evan shrugged shyly. "Why?" "Because everyone wants to believe something out there is stronger than their fears." Evan nodded, not knowing how to respond. Malcolm's words always felt like they carried more weight than he could handle. Malcolm chuckled. "Don't overthink it, kid. One day you'll see. You don't need wings to change the world." Evan didn't understand the meaning then, but he would. The war was reaching a breaking point. The Allied bombers, B-17s and B-24s, needed deep escorts as they pushed farther into German territory. But the Luftwaffe's fighters were adapting, flying faster, climbing higher, striking harder. Even the beloved P-51 Mustang, as impressive as it was, struggled to match the very top speeds of Germany's FW-190s and upgraded Me-109s. Every time a bomber limped home shredded by gunfire, every time a pilot's bunk stayed empty the next morning, an invisible pressure built on the base. But what troubled Evan wasn't the distant strategy meetings or the tense faces of commanders. It was the exhausted slump of pilots after each sortie, the quiet tears of mechanics who had to scrub blood from empty cockpits, the desperate hope in Malcolm's eyes each time he returned safely. Everyone knew the truth. Something had to change, yet no one could see how. Not yet. One rainy afternoon, the supply depot was chaos. Crates everywhere, paperwork flying in the wind, overworked logisticians swearing creatively. Evan was searching for a shipment of spark plugs when he stumbled upon it. A dented steel barrel shoved behind a stack of damaged crates, stamped with fading red letters. 150 grade fuel, test batch, handle with care. He blinked. 100 octane fuel was standard. The Mustangs were built around it. But 150 grade? He had only heard rumors, whispers of an experimental high-performance fuel meant to push engine limits far beyond the usual. No one had mentioned it in briefings. No mechanics talked about it. No officers requested it. It was like the barrel had been forgotten by time. Evan touched the cold metal and felt a strange shiver, as if fate were tapping him on the shoulder. But he tried to brush it off. He was just a mechanic. Someone else would figure this out, right? That night, the thought haunted him. What could 150-grade fuel actually do? Could it boost the Merlin engine? Could it hurt it? Could it change something? He needed answers. So he approached Sergeant Hollander, the chief mechanic, a bulldog of a man with a stiff mustache and a voice like gravel. "Sir," Evans said, swallowing nervously, "hypothetically, what would happen if we put higher octane fuel, say 150 grade, into a P-51? Hollander stared at him like he'd asked what would happen if a cow wore a parachute. "What would happen?" Hollander growled. "Maybe nothing. Maybe it'd fry the engine. Maybe it'd make the thing cough itself apart. Doesn't matter. We're not using experimentals unless Brass says so. Now quit bothering me." Evan nodded stiffly and walked away. But inside, something refused to settle. Why create a fuel no one used? Why send it to their base at all? Something wasn't adding up. And deep down, Evan felt, no, knew, that he needed to find out. The storm rolled in like a beast that night, wind howling across the airfield, rain lashing against metal roofs. Maybe that's why Evan couldn't sleep. Or maybe it was the voice of curiosity gnawing at him. What if this is important? What if this is the chance to matter? Before he knew it, he was pulling on his coat and heading toward Hangar 5, where an old P-51 tail number 326 sat waiting for parts recovery. It was rarely touched, mostly ignored, perfect for a test. The hangar doors groaned in the wind as he slipped inside, and to his surprise, someone was already there. "Malcolm." "Kid," Malcolm said softly, "either you're planning something stupid, or you're planning something important." Evan took a deep breath and told him everything about the barrel, the octane, the questions, the possibilities. He expected Malcolm to laugh. Instead, Malcolm placed a hand on his shoulder. "Let's see what that fuel can do." Together, in the dim glow of a single hanging bulb, they rolled the heavy barrel over, wrestled the hose into place, and filled the old Mustang's tanks with 150-grade fuel. The smell was sharp, potent, almost electric. The moment felt bigger than both of them. When dawn broke, the airfield was silent. Malcolm climbed into the cockpit of the old Mustang. Evan checked the engine mounts one last time, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. "Ready?" Malcolm asked. "No." But Evan nodded anyway. Malcolm pressed the starter. The engine coughed, sputtered, wheezed. Evan held his breath. Then, with a deep, thunderous roar, it came alive. But it wasn't the familiar growl of the Merlin engine. It was deeper, sharper, like the aircraft had been awakened from a long sleep. Malcolm revved the throttle gently, eyes widening. "This isn't normal," he said. "This feels powerful." Evan swallowed. They both knew what had to come next. "Let's fly her," Malcolm said, and without waiting for permission, without clearing it with command, without knowing if they were risking everything, he took off. The Mustang leapt off the ground like a wild animal freed from chains. Evan ran to the runway edge, staring up as Malcolm climbed higher, then faster, then higher still. The Mustang cut through the clouds with unnatural speed. The radio crackled. Malcolm's voice came through, breathless. "Kid, I'm pushing her now." Evan closed his eyes. "Malcolm." A pause. Then, "Evan, this thing's flying like it's on fire. I'm reading speeds. Good Lord. Close to 490 miles per hour." Evan nearly fell over. 499, Paul. That was beyond anything they had ever seen from a Mustang. It meant he'd discovered something incredible. When Malcolm landed, he stepped out of the cockpit and stared at Evan for a long moment. "Kid," he whispered. "You just changed the air war." They rushed to report the results. Colonel Strafford listened with an expression carved from stone. "You two performed an unauthorized test," he said flatly. "You tampered with aircraft without approval. You endangered personnel. You disobeyed chain of command." Evan stared at the floor. He expected punishment, court-martial, dismissal, anything. Then Strafford exhaled heavily. "And worst of all, you brought me good news wrapped in reckless behavior." Evan's head shot up. Strafford's expression softened just slightly. "Your results may be valuable," he admitted, "but until we verify them properly, you are not to repeat this stunt. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Malcolm said, but Evan knew the colonel doubted them. Authority rarely accepts miracles without paperwork. The war didn't care about protocols. 3 days later, a bomber escort mission turned desperate. Intelligence reported heavy Luftwaffe activity, too heavy. Broadcasts from earlier missions were grim. "We're outnumbered. Request immediate reinforcements." "They're climbing faster than we can." "We've lost 3 bombers in 2 minutes. Where are our escorts?" Panic spread across the base. Pilots scrambled, mechanics yelled, engines roared. Malcolm found Evan near the hangars. "We have one chance," Malcolm said quietly. "One." Evan knew what he meant. The 150-grade fuel. The fuel no one believed in yet. The fuel that could change everything. "You sure about this?" Evan whispered. "No," Malcolm replied, "but I'd rather die trying something new than watch our friends die doing the same old thing." In the next hour, they secretly fueled 6 Mustangs with the experimental mixture. The pilots didn't know the full story, but they trusted Malcolm, and they trusted Evan. As the Mustangs taxied onto the runway, Evan felt the weight of the world pressing on his chest. What if he was wrong? What if the engines failed mid-air? What if this was the mistake that haunted him forever? Then Malcolm, sitting in the lead Mustang, looked back, gave him a small salute, and yelled through the canopy, "Believe in yourself, kid. You were right before. Let's hope you're right again." The Mustangs took off, not just into battle, but into history. The 6 modified Mustangs sliced through the early morning clouds, flying in tight formation behind Malcolm. Sunlight glinted off their silver skins like the flash of drawn blades. Below them, the bomber group lumbered toward its target, slow, heavy, vulnerable. And high above, like scavengers circling prey, waited the German fighters. Dozens of FW-190s and Me-109s dove in perfect synchronization, engines screaming. Their pilots had grown arrogant after months of easy victories. They believed the skies belonged to them. Then they saw the Mustangs, and something felt wrong. The Mustangs closed distance faster than anything the German pilots had ever encountered. Their acceleration was unnatural, their climbs too powerful, their dives impossibly sharp. It didn't look like Allied aircraft. It looked like something new. German radios exploded with disbelief. "Was some Teufel... These Mustangs, how are they so fast? They're climbing with us. Impossible!" But it wasn't impossible. It was 150-grade fuel. Within minutes, Malcolm and his squadron tore through the German formation. Evan watched from the command tent, listening to radio chatter with trembling hands. "Scratch 1, Focke-Wulf. He can't outrun me, not today. Bombers are clear. Repeat, bombers are clear." For the first time in months, the bomber crews had escort fighters that could dominate the sky, and the Luftwaffe had no idea what they were up against. When Malcolm and the pilots returned, dust swirling around their wheels as they braked on the runway, the entire base seemed to hold its breath. Then cheering erupted. Mechanics, officers, cooks, medics, everyone swarmed the tarmac. They'd listened to the radios. They'd heard the impossible become real. Malcolm climbed out of his Mustang, face streaked with sweat, eyes blazing with adrenaline and awe. He walked straight to Evan. "You did this," Malcolm said. "No," Evan whispered, overwhelmed. "We did. You trusted me." Their celebration didn't last long. Colonel Strafford arrived with a strict, unreadable face. "Captain Reeves, Private Ward, my office. Now." Inside, the air was thick with tension. "I should have you both court-martialed," Strafford began. "You defied orders. You conducted unauthorized modifications. You risked aircraft and lives." Evan's stomach tightened. The glory of moments ago vanished like smoke. "But," Strafford continued, leaning forward, "you also saved 72 men today." Evan's breath caught. "You found something valuable, something game-changing, and the war needs game-changers." Strafford finally allowed a rare, faint smile. "Consider your suspension lifted. From this moment on, Private Ward is assigned to a new task, evaluating the controlled use of 150-grade fuel." Evan blinked. "Sir, I'm just a mechanic." "Not anymore," Strafford said. "You're now the mechanic who changed the air war." Over the next weeks, Evan lived in Hangar 5. He studied every inch of the Merlin engine, learning how the higher-grade fuel affected compression ratios, boost pressures, and temperatures. His hands were constantly stained with grease. His eyes burned from nights spent poring over diagrams and notes. Other mechanics, older, more seasoned, skeptical at first, soon gathered around him, asking questions, taking notes. "Ward, what's your take on the cooling system mods? Think the supercharger can handle this much boost? Walk me through your fuel line adjustments." Evan wasn't used to being an authority, but he was one now. Malcolm often stopped by late at night, bringing him coffee. "You're doing something important," Malcolm would say. But Evan didn't do it for recognition. He did it because every pilot who flew one of his modified Mustangs trusted him with their life, and that responsibility weighed heavily, but beautifully, on his heart. Black Wednesday. That's what people would someday call it. The orders came early. Strike a crucial factory deep in Germany. High risk, heavy resistance expected. No room for error. Evan prepared Malcolm's Mustang with extra care, checking every bolt twice, then again, then again. Something felt off. A knot in his stomach. A whisper he couldn't explain. Malcolm sensed it too. "Kid," he said gently, "don't look at me like that. I don't know. I have a bad feeling." Malcolm placed a hand on his shoulder. "Listen. Nobody gets through war untouched, but we get through because someone like you gives us a fighting chance." He climbed into the cockpit. Evan stood on the ground, unable to shake the dread flooding him. Hours later, the radio transmissions shattered the air. "Heavy flak! Heavy flak! We're surrounded. 109s everywhere. Reeves, break right! Break right! I'm hit! I'm hit!" Evan froze. Static crackled. Then came Malcolm's final transmission. Broken, weak, but unmistakably his voice. "Kid, whatever happens, remember, you were right. You changed everything. Don't ever think you're small." The line went silent. Malcolm never returned. The runway felt colder than snow. Evan felt smaller than dust. The base lost many good pilots that day. But losing Malcolm was like losing the sun. Evan didn't leave the hangar for hours after the news. He sat on the wing of Malcolm's empty Mustang, the one he had tuned with such care, staring at the seat where Malcolm once joked, dreamed, lived. Guilt gnawed at him. He felt like he'd sent Malcolm into the sky that day. He felt like the fuel wasn't enough. He felt like he had failed the one person who believed in him. Sergeant Hollander found him there. "You think he'd want you to quit?" Hollander asked. "I don't know what he'd want," Evan whispered, voice breaking. Hollander grunted. "I do. He'd want you fixing these planes so his buddies make it home. Something inside Evan cracked open, not in a way that broke him, but in a way that rebuilt him. Malcolm had believed in him. Now he had to believe in himself. Evan wiped his eyes, picked up a wrench, and went back to work. As more 150 Fuel Mustangs entered combat, the Luftwaffe grew desperate. Reports from captured pilots were frantic. These American Mustangs, they go faster than they should. They climb like devils. We cannot escape them. This is unnatural. German engineers searched for answers. Were the Allies using new engines, new superchargers, secret aircraft? They dissected wrecked Mustangs, but found nothing unusual. Standard engines, standard parts. The secret wasn't metal, it was chemistry. And it was a mechanic named Evan Ward. By spring, the skies looked different. The Mustangs weren't just keeping up with German fighters, they were outclassing them. Bomber survival rates climbed. German interception success plummeted. Pilots returned from missions with smiles instead of thousand-yard stares. Evan's modified Mustangs became legendary among the pilots. They called them Red Line Angels, Devil's Fuel Birds, Ward Specials. Evan blushed every time someone mentioned it. He never flew. He never shot down a plane. He never stepped onto a battlefield. But the tide of the war shifted because of him. May 1945. It began with whispers, then rumors. Then someone ran across the base shouting, "Germany surrendered. It's over." Mechanics hugged, pilots cried. Supply officers danced awkwardly and beautifully. Evan walked to the runway alone, staring at the empty horizon where so many had flown, fought, and fallen. He sat beside a silver Mustang and whispered, "We did it, Malcolm." A warm breeze brushed past him, and for a moment, just a moment, it felt like Malcolm was standing beside him again. War ended, but history didn't tell every story. Books mentioned improved fuels and tactical advantages. Films praised brave pilots and daring missions. Museums displayed gleaming P-51 Mustangs. But no one wrote about Private Evan Ward. No one interviewed him. No one knew the small mechanic who made Mustangs fly like lightning, and Evan didn't mind. He returned to Nebraska, married, raised 2 children, worked as a modest engineer. But every time he heard a plane overhead, he looked up, not with envy, but with quiet pride, because he knew something the world didn't. Sometimes heroes are anonymous. Sometimes wars are changed by hands, not headlines. 40 years later, Evan visited an aviation museum during a family trip. His granddaughter tugged his hand. "Grandpa, look, a Mustang." Evan smiled as the silver aircraft gleamed above them under museum lights. A young tour guide lectured a group. These P-51s became incredibly fast late in the war, thanks to improvements in fuel and some mystery mechanics modification. Legend says it was discovered by accident, but his identity remains unknown. An elderly veteran in the crowd raised a trembling hand. "You're saying no one knows who improved the Mustangs?" "No one," the guide replied. "Records were lost. Some believe it was a low-ranking mechanic, but we don't know his name." Evan chuckled softly. The guide noticed and approached him. "Sir, are you enjoying the exhibit?" Evan nodded. "It's beautiful. Brings back memories." The guide gestured to a visitor signature sheet. "If you'd like to leave your name, we collect signatures from veterans." Evan wrote it down. The guide glanced and froze. "Evan? Ward? Sir, are you the Evan Ward?" Evan shrugged modestly. "I'm not sure about the son. But yes, I'm Evan." The tour guide's eyes filled with awe. "You changed history," he whispered. Evan looked up at the suspended Mustang, proud, silent, timeless. "No," Evan said gently. "I just believed that someone small could do something big." The guide swallowed hard. The crowd grew quiet. His granddaughter squeezed his hand tightly. And for the first time in his entire life, Evan allowed himself to feel like the hero the world never knew.